Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
I will, I think, return to that story or to that question at some point in the future. Looking for people with perhaps positive interpretations. There were a couple. There's a lady in Norwich, apparently, who's absolutely certain that we will come up with a brilliant plan, but she couldn't tell us yet what it was. And I'm glad to hear that James in Peckham thinks his business will improve. He is in the business of, well, there's no polite way of putting it, transporting corpses. But I don't think that qualifies as transporting goods for sale. So I hope you're right about your VAT somehow being waived. I really do, because we could all be coming to you for a handout soon, mate. 5 minutes after 11. Speaking of people who've changed their minds, do you remember a politician called Suella Fernandez, who was a prominent member of that ERG group that Jacob Rees-Mogg now heads? Here she is on the 6th of April of last year.
This figure of 50 billion doesn't have any legal basis whatsoever. It's been manufactured, and it doesn't seem likely that there will be such a bill for £50 billion. It's part of Project Fear. Health warning, don't believe it. You know, we pay into the European Investment Bank, and so actually we're going to get a windfall from leaving. So I think that the scaremongering about having to pay to leave is just not true. We have a lot to gain. Our best days lie ahead, and we're going to be enjoying the freedoms and enjoying the benefits that we gain from leaving.
OK, so the scaremongering about having to pay to leave is just not true. I don't know whether it's deliberately to avoid responsibility for comments made like that, but since then she's got married and she's taken her husband's name, so she's not actually known as Suella Fernandez anymore. I wonder whether this has confused some of the archivists, because it's actually the same person who said this yesterday.
This is a factual question. I understand what the political declaration is. Let me try a third or fourth time. Isn't it the case that the financial settlement that we're going to be asked to vote on in October, we will be asked to vote on that before we have a legal treaty before us on the future relationship? Is that factually correct or not?
Yes, I mean, I don't deny that there will be a legal treaty which will be forthcoming on the future framework.
I return to John Whittingdale's question then. Given that you've, at the fourth time of asking, confirmed that we will be voting on the financial settlement before we have a legal text on the future agreement, is it the government's intention and policy to insert into that phase 1 agreement conditionality on payment depending on the content of the future agreement? Is that the government's policy?
The withdrawal agreement text has been nearly finalised and agreed. That contains issues relating to the financial settlement. As drafted, it doesn't contain aspects that you talk about on conditionalities.
Right.
However, we must remember that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. And so that principle stated in the joint report does apply to this whole package of our departure.
I find that quite interesting psychologically. I want you to just... I hope you enjoy this sort of thing as much as I do. We're like archaeologists now, aren't we? Looking for the hypocrisy. And my God, it's very, very easy. You don't need a metal detector. You just need a rusty spoon. But listen to the difference in her tone. When she was talking nonsense, she sounded really, really confident. And now when she's forced by quite adroit questioning at the Brexit Select Committee yesterday to tell the truth, she sounds, I would say, timid and confused. So just don't even focus on the words. Here is the then Suella Fernandez talking undiluted twaddle on Question Time in April of last year. Oh, we'll get that ready. The one that we played just 2 or 3 minutes ago.
This figure of 50 billion doesn't have any legal basis whatsoever. It's been manufactured, and it doesn't seem likely that there will be such a bill for £50 billion. It's part of Project Fear.
Project Fear. Health warning.
Don't believe it.
But it's true.
You know, we pay into the European Investment Bank, and so actually we're going to get a windfall.
Don't know really what it means. Windfall, yes.
So I think that the scaremongering about having to pay to leave is just not true. We have a lot to gain. Our best days lie ahead.
Our best days lie ahead.
And we're going to be
Onwards
enjoying the freedom
unicorns for everyone.
and enjoying the benefits that we gain from leaving.
Assemble the gammon. We need some applause. So there you go, you see, and she sounded really bouncy, really on it. Yes, I'm going places. And then just over a year later...
The withdrawal agreement text has been nearly finalised and agreed.
Yeah,
that contains issues relating to the financial settlement. As drafted, it doesn't contain aspects that you talk about on conditionality. However, we must remember that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. And so that principle stated in the joint report does apply to this whole package of our departure.
Health warning, you said we wouldn't have to pay. You said it was scaremongering. You can hear in her voice that she knows the game is up. That's what's so fascinating at the moment, politically. You can hear in the voice of someone like that, let alone the words, which absolutely prove the point that she was talking twaddle last April and wasn't, I don't know, knowledgeable, informed, intelligent enough to understand that she was talking twaddle, or possibly just so far down the rabbit hole that she'd forgotten what daylight looked like. But you can hear in her voice she knows the game is up. So what are they pushing for now? What are they hanging on for? That's the thing that's really confusing. Head of the Revenue and Customs, head of the Port of Dover. If they do the Johnson-Gove-Rees-Mogg plan, and at the moment, there is no better deal in place. If that's what they do, it's what people like her are pushing for, what happens? What do they get out of it? That I do not know. But I enjoyed that. I just think it's nice to have a little look in the rearview mirror and see what might have parked up in the hard shoulder. I am going to move on to something completely different now. We haven't talked about taxis and minicabs and the like for a while, and there are a couple of stories that concern me enormously. I've always been of the view, because when I was a kid, when I was a lad, is it still a thing, the illegal minicabbing? The ones that when you fell out of Maximus in Leicester Square after a top night at Love Ranch, and that is a very small constituency of people who are going to be nodding along with recognition. Or you'd have people coming up to you offering to drive you home, and they had no licences or anything. It's so long since I've been in central London or Manchester or Birmingham in the middle of the small hours of the morning. That was a really big thing when I was of a clubbing age, and it was dangerous because if they were unlicensed, then they were unchecked, unscrutinised, and bad things could happen. There were very scary adverts with the suggestion that if you got into the back of an unlicensed minicab, you could be exposing yourself to the risk of rape or sexual assault. And I don't know whether that has been addressed, that problem, but if you look at what's been going on in Birmingham, you'd be forgiven for concluding that they've simply created the same risk but given licences to the potential criminals. This is a Freedom of Information request that's gone into Birmingham City Council, Europe's largest local authority, and they were seeking to establish how many licensed taxi drivers with criminal records were operating there in 2018. They found several who had served long custodial sentences, many with recent convictions for serious driving offences, including having no insurance, drink driving, driving whilst using a mobile phone. Some had been caught joyriding, others had lost their driving licences repeatedly, and one had received a suspended prison sentence for a bomb hoax. Criminals with records of dealing crack, child abuse, assault and burglary have also been given licences to work as taxi drivers in England's second city. The Times yesterday revealed a loophole in the law that allows councils to make loads and loads of money by handing out minicab licences to people anywhere in the country, regardless of whether or not the drivers intended to work in their local areas. So you will fully understand why several local authorities, including Rochdale and Rotherham, the towns where the despicable and disgusting so-called grooming gangs were operating, and many members of those gangs were minicab drivers. They're particularly cross about the surge in cross-border taxi licences handed out by the likes of Rossendale and Wolverhampton councils. Because if you're not responsible for issuing the licences, and yet the person who has received the licence is free to drive in your area, then your governance has been compromised. So I presume that this applies across all private hire vehicles, black cabs and minicabs, but I'm always open to correction on those sort of issues. I don't have a specific question on this. The headline in the Times says it all, really. Criminal culture in the cab trade. And yes, they are, I'm afraid, black cabs as well as minicabs. The Hackney cab driver who had a licence since 2006 kept it until 2016 despite being convicted of assault by beating. There's a private hire driver who's had a licence since 2010 was allowed to keep it despite a racially aggravated public order offence. Another one who was convicted in 2008 of possessing heroin, crack and cannabis with intent to supply was granted a private hire licence. There's one taxi rank in Birmingham where concerns about drivers procuring sex were raised by one member of the public. I mean, this is really, really gross. And it is, if you like, depressing, because when I was younger, the idea of getting into a licensed taxi or a licensed minicab was a way of ensuring your safety. I've certainly always been of the view that I would never put my daughters in anything but a black cab in London. That's partly because I'm a great supporter of the black cab trade, but also partly because, even though they have had their problems in the past with individual drivers, the scrutiny seems to me to be greater. But these are black cabs in Birmingham. So if I'm back at home, if I'm back at mum's, and the kids are a little bit older and they want to go out in town, I would have said to them, get a black cab home. The difference between a black cab in London and a black cab in Birmingham being, to my somewhat uneducated mind, relatively small, negligible. I read this. It's incredible. Can anyone make sense of it? 0345 6060 973. That's all. Is this just? Because quite often the simplest explanation turns out to be the right one. Is it just a cash cow? Is it just the fact that people have to pay to get a licence, so the council are trying to churn out as many as they can? We've also got an Uber story to talk about, but I'm more interested in this one first, because these are the licensed taxi drivers, both Hackney cab drivers and private hire drivers. And they're getting licences in Birmingham and other parts of the country despite having fairly hefty criminal records. I'm a big believer in rehabilitation and second chances, but if I'm getting in the back of a car, or more pertinently, if someone I love is getting in the back of a car that's been driven by someone who's got various criminal convictions, I kind of feel that we should know about it. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. It's 11:16. So, I mean, I'm interested in this for two reasons. Number one, I find the whole issue of cabbing fascinating and important. I know it sounds a little odd, but I think that the Uber black cab battle is emblematic of the next stage of economic evolution in Western countries. I think this so-called disruptive capitalism that everyone gets excited about is basically about capital, very wealthy people, looking at income streams that they currently don't have a slice of and working out how they can get a slice of it. So the black cab driver in most big cities is emblematic of the sole trader, the small business person, and historically they were able to make a decent living, and they had protections that were put in place by covenant and by law that, for example, only they could be hailed in the street. But then this, I know these are overused words, neoliberal and all that, and none of us are entirely sure what they mean, but it seems to describe a system in which if I've got a load of money and I want to make more by doing nothing except investing it, then the best places to look are the places where people are currently making money and keeping it and not giving any of it to investors. So apart from the hire purchase agreement that you'd have to have for your cab, you're not giving over any of your money when you drive a black cab to any investors. Uber drivers, I think, are giving about half of their money back to base. And what's the base? The investors. So that's why I'm partly interested in it. And the second reason today is because this is based in Birmingham, so we can drag the conversation out of the capital city and look at other parts of the country as well. What has happened to the trade, okay? Because if councils are divvying up licences to drivers with criminal records who are going to operate in markets miles away from where the council is based, it seems to me that it's close to criminal that nobody saw this coming. It's absolutely disgusting that my children could get into a taxi, a black cab in particular in Birmingham, because I always work on the provision that they're safer, and it could be driven by a convicted drug dealer who's been given a licence. That's the bit I don't get. What's happened to the trade? 22 after 11 is the time. Don's in Guildford. Don, what would you like to say?
Right. I think cross-border hiring should never have been allowed.
When did it come in?
It came in, I think, about 5 years ago. I could be totally wrong on that, but it's quite a long time. It's quite a long time. if you're licensed in Birmingham, you can say, oh, I'm going to come to work in Guildford. I'm going to work in a private hire firm. But you've got no control. You've got no... nobody can... Oh, it's so difficult to explain this.
That's all right. Take your time, Don. There's no pressure. I mean, what's your interest in it? What's your kind of perspective?
I think the whole lot's all about money.
No, but you personally, what's your involvement in the trade?
Right, I look after taxi drivers. I do taxi meters, and I was a taxi driver for 29 years. I've been totally in the trade for 49 years.
Right.
So, and the way they've done it now, I mean, Uber can work anywhere in the country, basically, which is totally wrong, because there's private hire firms and taxi firms. They're all suffering because of, you know, as many drivers as you like. There's not enough work for everybody, and it seems that the councils they keep on putting the rates up to have the car tested. You know, it could be £300 or £400 a year just to test the cars. Then they work somewhere else. Where's it all going to stop?
Well, I don't know. I need you to help me, because you're the one with 49 years on the clock. So councils raise money by giving out licences, but surely if getting a licence doesn't give you a guarantee of a decent income, you're not going to apply for a licence. Or are we now talking about people who do a little bit of driving on the side and have other incomes and other jobs as well, but they're nicking money out of the pockets of people who would once have been full-time drivers?
Exactly. They do that. I mean, there's a lot of part-timers. There's people, I mean... You've got some areas, you can have any age car you like. You can have a 20-year-old car, so the car doesn't cost them a lot of money. But then you've got some people, they say we can only have a car up to 7 years old, which is fine. But you just get people, oh, we're not making enough money, so I'll go and rip someone off.
Yeah, I'm still not getting to the nugget. Do you know what I mean? I do, because the criminality is clearly a clear and present danger, and then the dilution of the ability to earn a living is a clear and present danger. But I don't know who's responsible for it. We need to have a look at where the cross-border stuff came in and where the problems come from. And I haven't got the question right, Don. So please accept my apologies for sort of badgering you. But stop badgering the witness, my lad. What is the question then on this one? The question is, how the hell have we ended up in a country where major cities can have convicted criminals driving around in licensed taxis? Give me your answer to that, OK? 0345 6060 973. And I think it was the courts that brought in cross-border licences. Hackney drivers could go to work in different boroughs to their licences, and greedy councils and minicab companies have cashed in. A few people are telling me, but I need someone to explain it perfectly. Martin has phoned from Mayfair in the belief that he can do just that. Martin, go on.
Hi, James.
Hi.
OK, let's use an example, London.
Yeah.
So you have a driver that's licensed in London by Transport for London, and his vehicle is licensed by Transport for London, but then he works in another part of the country. So the enforcement by TfL, they can only enforce in London, but he can work cross-border hire virtually anywhere in the country without any enforcement whatsoever, because the enforcement is only for the area that he's been licensed.
What does enforcement mean, Martin?
It means, so TfL, for example, they will have 300 officers on the streets, and they regularly check the cars and the drivers. Sometimes when they drop off at a station, you'll see enforcement officers there.
Yes.
They would check their licence, they check their insurance, they would check their vehicle.
But if I'm driving around Walsall, then even if they've got their own council people out on the street, he's not going to check me because my licence was issued in London.
Correct, yes, and that's what cross-border hiring is.
Right, but why is that problematical then? Because I mean, essentially, I'm a decent fella. I've got my licence in London. I'll work where I jolly well like, and when I'm back in London, you can check me, and when I'm not in London, you can't. But I've got nothing to hide.
Well, yeah, well, that's if you're doing it above board. What happens if you haven't got the proper insurance, hire and reward insurance? There's no one there to check.
Yeah, but my problem today...
Your license might have expired. Your licence might have expired.
But my problem today is with people whose licences haven't expired, people who have fully functioning kosher licences, who, in my view, shouldn't have them. So how have we ended up in a place where a driver caught in possession of heroin and crack cocaine with intent to supply, put under a curfew for being caught with other drugs, he can get a licence?
Because the standard of handing out the licence and the criminal record check is below par.
But they knew about his criminal record checks, and I'm badgering the witness again, but this is a really much more confusing story than it initially appears, because everything you've said has got me nodding along, and then the little voice in my head, you know, Martin, the annoying one that always goes, yeah, but.
Okay, I'm going to give you another example.
Bring it.
Okay, say you've got a guy that comes into this country. Let's say he's age 35 when he comes into the country.
Yeah.
He's lived here for 3 years. Okay, now he's 38.
Yeah.
He applies for a licence for a private hire driver. His criminal record check will only go back for the 3 years.
No. Again, I recognise that problem, but these criminal record checks are known. They've come out in the Freedom of Information. It's not. Oh my God, how did he get a job with a criminal record? It's oh my God, they knew he had a criminal record.
Yeah, because what happens as well. Okay, let me explain how that works. They will see that he's got this criminal record check, and all because he's got a criminal record doesn't mean they will refuse the licence.
Why not?
Sit there. Well, you have to ask the law authority that. They sit there and decide which ones they're going to allow to be licensed, knowing that they have a criminal record. So you have guys in London that are private hire drivers that have a criminal record, and it's TfL or another licensing area will do the same, and they consider that one to be okay. You have to ask them why, because I'm a cab driver,
yes,
and I don't make that decision.
No, I get it. I know. I understand. You've given me the rubric, the vocabulary, but I still don't have what I need to understand how we've ended up in a situation like this. Criminal culture in the cab trade. This is specific to Birmingham, where licences are doled out to habitual offenders, and I still don't really understand why. Martin, thank you. Danny's in Camden. Danny, what's going on?
Hello, James.
All right, Danny.
Well, can I just finish what you're talking about with DBS? I can explain the cross-border just after.
Of course.
DBS, basically, what's happened is DBS checks, firstly, are not statutory, right? A local authority does not really have to complete a DBS check by drivers. But what's happening is now, there's just basically down to licensing officers to make the decision whether they accept someone as an applicant. So each authority has different licensing criteria.
So you go to the one with the lowest criteria.
Lowest, exactly.
And that looks like Birmingham.
Birmingham and London. It's well known. That's why it's, with London, TfL vehicles have been working in, Newcastle, Glasgow.
And do they cost the same, roughly?
Well, they're cheaper. It's quicker to, it's just quicker to get the...
do you know what the problem is with your lot? I'll tell you what it is, because you've been moaning for years about everything. When you finally had something that you should have been moaning about, and we should all have sat up and taken notice, but you got ignored. You're the trade that cried wolf, Danny.
No, it's not, because it's happening. There's drivers. I mean, what basically happened with Uber. Because of this tech company.
We've lost the line. Danny, mate, you've made your point. I'm late for the news and the phone line's gone down the toilet, so we'll knit together all three of those observations. And just for the attention of all the taxi drivers who've turned me off because of my constant truth-telling about Brexit, who've now turned me back on again because they've been told that I'm talking about taxis, I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to talk a bit more about Brexit. Dominic Cummings, who was the man that ran the Vote Leave campaign, has described it now as a train wreck which may be beyond saving. So if you're unhappy with people describing Brexit in negative and pessimistic terms, take it up with the bloke who directed the Vote Leave campaign. The government is wasting time, he says, with logically, legally and practically incompatible promises, and he is urging Conservative Party MPs and donors to get rid of Theresa May in order to somehow save Brexit and keep Jeremy Corbyn out of Downing Street. There's also some rather jolly news coming in from Germany about British businesses locating there, with the German trade spokesperson describing it as an inevitable upshot of up by about 20% year on year, the number of businesses relocating from here to Germany. So that's your Brexit bulletin for this hour. No more Brexit, I promise, until tomorrow, but at 12 noon we will be doing Mystery Hour. Let's go to Howard, who's in Highbury, on the question of the criminal culture in the cab trade is the only way I can phrase it. Howard, how did it happen? What's going on? Good morning.
Good morning, James. How are you doing?
I mustn't grumble. I don't like this story, though, Howard.
Yeah, it is quite a scary situation. I mean, the more that it's leaking through the news, and the public are becoming aware of the dark side of the cab trade, it obviously opens up quite a few people's eyes. I know that you've had some gentlemen on before trying to explain the nature of cross-border hiring, and I wanted to elaborate on that slightly with quite a worrying situation, which might make people see how scary and how serious it actually is. I'm not going to mention any names. I've been advised not to say any names. They're not live cases, but there's quite an active situation with Southend Council.
Right.
And it was quite well
just give me your qualifications first, Howard. I know it's not mystery hour, but just give me your credentials.
Will I get a round of applause?
Let's not get carried away. I get a Ray Liotta.
I own a fleet of London black taxis and a repair centre for black cabs. But I'm also on the executive committee of an association called the LMCPA that represents fleets and garages of black cabs in London.
There we go. Perfect. Carry on.
So, yeah, it was quite a well-known situation. I think it was a year, 2 years ago. A couple of gentlemen who had their PHV licences in Southend revoked for some pretty serious and heinous crimes.
Yes.
And Southend said, we're not going to allow them to be PHV drivers in our area. They went to a different local authority. In this instance, it was actually TfL. And they got licensed as private hire drivers through TfL. Then through the use of the Uber app, which is international, they then went back to Southend, and because they were licensed by TfL, they were able to operate on Uber, picking up members of the public in Southend, and there was nothing that Southend Council or Essex Police could do about it.
Blimey.
Yeah, because their licence wasn't issued by Southend. Southend had revoked their licence.
No, I'm not completely stupid, Howard. I was just saying, blimey, out of shock, not a failure to understand what you'd said to me. Because, I mean, again, that just beggars belief, doesn't it? So the other licensing authority didn't know that they'd lost their licences in Southend, or didn't care? Or don't we know the answer to that?
I don't suppose we're actually going to really know, but every licensing authority has different criteria, different standards. To answer something you said earlier on, London black taxis has the highest standard. So Hackney licences in London are different to Hackney licences throughout the rest of the country. London is its own little bubble. But Hackney black cabs in London has the highest standards. So you're a lot safer in a black cab in London.
I leave that unchallenged. It goes with my kind of worldview as well, and the facts, of course, back you up. But I suppose we need to point out that there have been incidences of crimes being committed by black cab drivers, most notably with John Warboys. But if you're looking for statistical comparisons, then you're way ahead of the game getting into a black cab in London. But I can't get into a black cab in London that's been licensed in Birmingham, can I?
No, because the Hackney licence on the back is different.
But I can get into a minicab in Wolverhampton that's been licensed, or in Rochdale that's been licensed in Wolverhampton.
Well, you've got to thank our favourite app for that, because, as I said, it's national, so Uber just...
Yeah, but before Uber came along, would that not still be true?
It wasn't quite as easy
because I needed an office to work from.
Exactly.
God. It's an education, isn't it, this programme on a good day, Howard? Only thanks to people like you. So Uber is actually... Because I thought... I mean, I've got another story about Uber to talk about today, but I thought that this was not an Uber story, but actually when you're trying to work out how anyone could make a living in Wolverhampton despite having licensed their cab in... I don't know, Stoke Newington, that's a bad example, somewhere. The answer is that I don't need a minicab office anymore. I've got Uber, so I can be bombing around wherever I want to go.
Well, that's right, and people often think that the war, if you like, the battle is between Uber and black cab drivers, but what they don't realise is that Uber and Lyft and the other companies of their ilk have actually decimated the local private hire firms. The local minicab firms have hardly any drivers because most drivers don't bother with a local office anymore. They just get on an app.
It's very true. It's very true. So this road does lead, not inexorably. There are other reasons as well, like lax licensing, but all of the other problems come into sharp relief and/or are exacerbated by the freedoms that Uber affords to its drivers.
Totally. Another thing that specifically London public, but the public in any of the major cities should also concern themselves with, is that look, the cities are where the money is, especially on the weekends, the Thursday nights, Friday nights, Saturday nights. And what you'll often find is where someone is licensed in a smaller town,
yes,
so to speak, on the nights when they want to earn big money, they'll leave their local areas, and London is flooded over the weekends with drivers from all over the country, all operating on these apps, just trying to take the money. Now, the problem there is these drivers don't know the streets. I mean, you could at least...
No, I park you there, because I'm familiar with this. I know that argument well, and it's true, but it's not what we're discussing today. What we're discussing today is a fear that you've just revivified, which is that if Birmingham's dishing out these licences willy-nilly to all sorts of ne'er-do-wells, there's nothing to stop them driving their private hire vehicles to London for a weekend and picking up. So I'm getting worried about putting my kids in a car in Birmingham. Black cabs can't come to London, but minicabs can, right?
Yep.
So TfL can't stop a Birmingham-registered minicab from pulling up outside the Hippodrome on Saturday night?
Oh, not really.
Are you sure?
Yeah, because that driver is... you know, obviously it's depending on how he's picking up the work, but if he's picking the work up
from Uber,
an app, then, you know, as far as they're concerned, it's legitimate. He's a licensed driver on the Uber app.
Yeah, so this is bad, man.
Yep.
Do you think the genie's out of the bottle now, Howard? Honestly, and I know it's your livelihood and your future and your business, but can you see any way back to a more regulated industry?
It worries me. I mean, look, there's always a way back, but there's too much money floating around. I mean,
and it's too broken up as well, though, because you could elect a relatively socialist mayor, and he could sort out London, perhaps, but he wouldn't be able to sort out anywhere else. So and if a council that's dishing them out willy-nilly is actually raising quite a lot of revenue as a result of that, they're not really going to queue up to surrender that revenue, are they?
Absolutely. I mean, things like this could only come from central government, from Chris Grayling, you know, from the top of the tree, and then he's got to try and convince all the local authorities to relinquish a nice little money earner.
Someone's just told me, you can tell me whether this is true, that Uber have stopped cross-border working for a number of months now. Drivers must stay in their respective licence area. As a result, there are over 7,000 drivers now operating in London who used to operate in areas such as Brighton, etc.
Well, they have started to implement changes. I mean, it's been publicised that Uber are making changes to their processes to try and win back their licence, because obviously, as we know, they're not currently licensed in London, although they're still operating.
Yes.
So they are making changes and implementing changes to cross-border hiring is one of the things that they're doing. I'll be completely honest with you. I'm not 100% certain that it's completely successcul at the moment.
Okay, well, Howard,
it is on the agenda, if it's, you know, but I don't believe it's currently.
Okay, well, no, we're all learning. It's not. I like these hours sometimes because there's not much prospect of having a scrap. We're all just adding to the sum total of shared knowledge. Thank you, Howard. There is some real concern here, and I said that thing to Danny. I think I'm going to be giving this one a few run-outs over the years to come, or over the months to come. I see how Howard feels about it. The trade that cried wolf, Howard.
Yeah, well, yeah, unfortunately, it seems to be the occasion when the wolf is coming.
Because I've been here for nearly 15 years, and you lot have been bending my ear about one thing or another practically every day of those 15 years. And then finally, when the wolf was at the door, people didn't... I listened. I was never going to take that away, but people didn't listen, and they should have done.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, well. No. And Howard and I, just to clarify the last conversation, I've double-checked this, a rare outbreak of research. Normally I don't need to research stuff when we're doing cab-related topics because there's a very, very long queue of people waiting to educate me. But the Uber organisation has actually prevented its drivers from operating the app outside the area in which they're licensed. That has been in place for a few months now, unable to work in London if you're not licensed there. If it could be, this correspondent tells me, that some people with Uber plates are touting, but that's illegal anyway and nothing to do with Uber. So I'm happy to clarify that. But I'm still extremely concerned about the criminal culture in the cab trade, and there are chinks of light coming into the story as a result of some of the contributions. Before 12 o'clock, we'll catch up with events this morning at the Grenfell Tower inquiry in South Kensington, and then after 12 o'clock, a much-needed injection of mirth. We're Mystery Hour. Mirth and enlightenment. Mirth and enlightenment sounds like a firm of solicitors. We shall be injecting mirth and enlightenment into the national bloodstream shortly after 12 when Mystery Hour gets underway. Before that, a bit more on this story. Adam is in Oxford. Adam, what would you like to say?
Hi there, James. How are you?
I'm very well, mate. What's on your mind?
Fantastic. Thanks for asking. It's just, I really wanted to open the floor if you had any questions for me. So I'm a private hire driver, and I was committed of an offence for which I was sent to prison back in 2009.
Yes.
So I kind of wanted to give you my perspective of it. So I'm kind of sat here. I know everyone's ringing up about the kind of...
No, you're a perfect contributor. What can I ask what you were sent down for?
Yeah, of course. So it's aggravated burglary and possession of Class A and Class B with intent to supply.
Okay.
And I was given 5 years custodial.
And you're here to tell me that you've cleaned up your act, you're now a law-abiding and productive member of society, and why should you have to spend your whole life paying for those crimes?
Pretty much.
Yeah?
Pretty much.
I don't know.
The kind of way I see it is, you know, when I did come out of prison, your options are obviously limited by my own doing, of course, but your options are limited, so that was a job that was available to me, you know.
Yes.
But saying that at the same time, what I would say is the council that I won't name, who I'm licensed with, and I was told by my insurance company, are one of the most strictest councils in the UK in terms of all the regulations, the kind of the tar, tread, everything. They're so strict, and they still gave me my license. And so I
what did you have? You make a very good point. I did allude to it, but of course, when I said I'm a big fan of rehabilitation, but the proof of the pudding is in the eating, isn't it? So what measures did they take to establish how complete your rehabilitation was?
I mean, they did ask for a report to my probation officer.
Okay.
And then to that kind of, I was a very low, let's say low risk, sort of ex-offender. They were sort of monitoring my progression the whole time. I think they could clearly see that I wasn't interested in the sort of lifestyle that I was leading before. I was completely committed to work, and I was, you know, young. I was trying to change my life, and now I run a private hire company. We've got 6 cars, and we employ over 10 drivers. So I'm employing drivers now as well. So it's kind of gone full circle.
Well, you remind me of something that I often remind other people of when they ring the programme, is that you can't base you can't generalise unduly. You can't take one example and extrapolate from that an entire section, because you are. I mean, I couldn't look you in the eye and tell you that you shouldn't be driving minicabs. I absolutely couldn't.
But the one thing that I would say is definitely, I mean, that's my council, so I won't tell you which one it is, but
sure.
They are quite strict.
Well, when you mention your probation reports and things like that, but again, all that costs money, because whoever it is that is scrutinising your application, they get paid, and the more scrutiny that goes on, the more payment is needed. So the harder they work to establish how good you are for the licence, the more it costs in the long run. And they're giving out these licences to raise revenue. The temptation will always be, in less responsible councils than the one where you're registered, the temptation will always be to, divvy up the licence anyway and cash the cheque.
That's very true. It's very true. James, I'm really sorry. I've got to go.
So have I, mate. You've got a job. He's got a job. He's got to say he's got a customer waiting. So have I. 11:54 is the time. LBC's chief reporter, Matthew Thompson, is in South Kensington at the Grenfell Tower inquiry, day 3. What's the latest, Matthew?
Good morning, James. Day 4, I think, if my maths
My
is
apologies,
correct.
you're absolutely right. Day 4.
Day 4. Well, look, I haven't got a great deal to bring you this morning, James, because we were slightly delayed getting started. But it is worth talking to you about the reason for that delay, which I think is quite encouraging and important. Basically, before this inquiry got underway, there were several families of the 72 victims who decided that for various reasons they didn't want to contribute. And actually, what's happened in the 4 days that this has been going on is that people have started to come forward and actually suddenly say that they would like their loved ones to be remembered in some way. And I suppose that's an encouraging sign, because it means that the process that the families fought so hard for is clearly, in the eyes of some of the families, doing some good. So this morning, actually, it wasn't in the schedule, but we heard a very short statement read by the lawyer on behalf of the sisters of Victoria King and her daughter Alexandra Atala, who were 2 Australians who died in the fire, and that wasn't initially part of the schedule. So encouraging that that's happened. It did get underway then as scheduled, and we've been hearing this morning commemorations of Mohammed Noor Tuku and his wife Amal Ahmedine and their 3-year-old daughter, Amaya Tuku Amadine. And again, it's just worth saying, James, that some of what we will play you is quite distressing. There's a wonderful, beautiful, but painful moment from Amal's sister Faiza, who talks about how much she loved her older sister, who used to, when they were kids, squeeze the nightmares away when she was having bad dreams, and it really is quite powerful.
Amaya's laugh was infectious. Her whole body would shake and she would jump up and down. She would run around and want to play with anybody, young or old. She was so smart and a bit cheeky, and we all realized pretty early on that she was definitely her mother's daughter. We celebrated her 3rd birthday February last year, and you can see her personality forming more and more, and we would get so excited by what an amazing human being she was going to grow up to be. Whenever I would take her to sleep, she would lay so close and rub and scratch your neck, as that was the only thing that soothed her to sleep. I would hold her tight, just like Amal did to me as a kid. And that's how they were when they were being burnt alive, holding each other so tight, trying to squeeze the nightmare away.
Take your time, there's no rush.
Till this day, and for the rest of my life, I will never accept that they are gone. I will continue planning Amaya's life. What she would be doing today, tomorrow, her 10th birthday, her 18th, her 21st, and the rest of her life.
It's obviously extremely difficult to listen to, James, and obviously every death is tragic, but it seems all the more so when we hear about the little kids, the 3-year-old Amaya, and yesterday we heard about Fatia Hassan and her sister Hania, just 4 and 3 years old, and those lives cut so tragically short are amongst the most difficult to listen to. But as I said at the start, at least perhaps with the fact that more families coming forward to take part in this process, there is an increasingly widespread feeling that it's doing some good.
Moving in the right direction against some pessimistic expectations. Very nicely put. Matthew Thompson, many thanks indeed. No apologies whatsoever for playing out that testimony, but perhaps a timely reminder of why it is so important. There are 2 reasons in my mind why it's important. The first and most important is that responsibility must be taken for avoidable decisions that led to this tragedy. And that is why it is so important to remember the scale and the profundity of the tragedy. And the second reason is the one that shames me as an Englishman. The second reason is the amount of effort that has been put in by profoundly unpleasant and unsavoury people to portray the victims of the Grenfell Tower tragedy as somehow undeserving of your sympathy because some of them had brown skin, or lots of vowels in their surname, or Middle Eastern nomenclature, or parents who perhaps had been born somewhere else. And the effort that these vile individuals now are putting into trying to turn you against your fellow humans is so epic that to remind ourselves of that basic humanity. Who can hear a sister describe the death of her beloved little sibling without a tear forming in their eye? Who can do that? And who can really, having listened to testimony like that, really care about a Middle Eastern name or a parent who was born elsewhere? That's why we're going to stay with this, and Matthew's going to stay with this all the way through.